the fourth album for me is a total labour of love, and I remember holding the vinyl for the first time, and we were at XFM in London, and we were doing a live session, and that was when our manager decided to film us unwrapping the vinyl as a big surprise, and I just burst into tears, just like, this is I wrote and recorded and mixed everything on this album. I was just so overjoyed at finishing it, at signing off on it. And I think that's one major thing that I learned, was to be able to realize when to stop. As a songwriter, it's very easy to keep feeding ideas into a song, to keep developing the song, to keep shifting and working on phrasing, even as you're recording. And the producer usually will facilitate that process, because they can go, okay, go with that, and then but we'll try the first idea, we'll do a couple of takes of that, and then we'll try the other, and we'll see which works best. And you can kind of control that. Whereas I think I didn't really have that capacity to make a decision up until that point. I would always be the one coming up with ideas and being unable to let any of the ideas go. And I'd learned, as kind of like a safety measure for myself, to step away at the mixing stage, to have nothing to do with it. Because I remember sitting in the studio with Ian as he was mixing Young Fraternity, and just getting so worked up, so stressed out at listening to what would be the final version of the accumulated process of writing something, touring it, playing it live in all its various incarnations, and then recording it, and then it just being solidified as this one concrete, though it is abstract because it's audio waveforms, but this concretized version of this abstract thing that you came up with, and that night by night would change in various kinds of ways. So when it came to All or Nothing and mixing, I said to Butch Vig, when we were at Conway Studios in Los Angeles, I said, by the way, this has nothing to do with you or your mixing skills or anything like that, but firstly, I'm not going to be here. Like, this is going to be something that is up to you. But also, I'd really like someone who wasn't involved in this project to do that. So we got Rich Costey to mix it. But that was also a stipulation I made to Corder Marshall, who was the head of Warner's at the time. He was asking me a lot about who I wanted to record the second album. And we were all being so indecisive. And I went, okay, wish list, Butch Vig produce, Rich Costey mix. And he went, okay, let's make it happen. And Butch was really keen to mix it, because I know that he'd worked so hard on it. And I know that for a lot of producers, they work with a view to mixing, because they're building the sonics. They're refining and working on everything. And I think when it came to the third album, I'd become a little more okay with the process of mixing, but when I was the only one who was in the studio when Stephen Street was mixing Money and Celebrity. Charlotte and Josh were off doing their various things, and I was able to compartmentalize my ears. I'd be sat reading a book and I'd be like, whatever's happening, that's up to Stephen. I'm having nothing to do with it. He'd go, is that okay? If you think it's okay, Stephen, it's okay. So on this album, being the one who was doing the mixing, who was finalizing everything, that wasn't an immediate thing that came to be. I went through a horrible couple of months of being unable to let these songs go. I would go into the studio at Hertford, the songs would be ready to mix, I would work on a mix, work all day, I would end up getting really depressed, and I would come to question my own ability, my own level of responsibility, which kind of imbued me with a real kind of lack of self-esteem. And that was a huge learning process, in that I had to learn not to be so hard on myself. And I think at that point I realized that recording should be an enjoyable process. Mixing should be an enjoyable process. That the song will speak for itself no matter how much you start carving the EQs, no matter how much compression you think is too much, no matter where you think the panning should be, or whether you should be phasing, various guitar channels, just enjoy it, And if you kind of get yourself into a mindset of, I love doing this, then actually you come out with some really great material, because you free yourself of a huge barrier. And I think one of the great things that I learned during the fourth album was that producing and mixing is kind of a state of mind. And I used to take this completely for granted, but we'd always be on tour. We've had the same tour manager / sound engineer for our entire career, Steve Gurney, who used to record and mix Cathedral. He used to be a dance mixer, but he toured with Napalm Death and Entomb. So he worked with these, really dirty doom metal bands that it was really hard for him to create clarity when they were playing live, but he found ways of doing it. So when he worked with us, he was just like, it's easy as pie. But he always said, these are the most expensive and most valuable pieces of musical equipment that you'll ever own. And I'd always be like, oh, that's such a cliche. What does that even mean? And I think once you use all kinds of equipment, once you use all kinds of monitoring, once you use various kinds of digital audio workfaces, or you use desks, you make it work, as long as you kind of just go, this is fine, I can do this. And you just give yourself space to be creative, give yourself space to trust your ears. I think I used to get really anxious that I was putting too much responsibility on Charlotte and Josh. And I think trusting myself a lot more as a producer and a songwriter and a performer, I suppose, also meant trusting Charlotte and Josh a lot more. So when it came to recording this album in isolation, I would say, Charlotte's got this. She can do it. So I said to Charlotte, how do you feel about getting a Scarlett 2 in, 2 out? I'll send you up a microphone. Just go off and teach yourself for a couple of weeks how to operate these things. Do you think you can record bass and vocals? And she went, yeah, I think I can do that. And she was, whilst kind of nursing one baby and readying herself for having another, she was recording bass and recording vocals and layering her vocals, and she made her own makeshift vocal booth and all that kind of stuff. So I think for this album, I just had a lot more faith in myself and other people. And that's something that's really helped me when it comes to recording other bands as well. I had a punk band come in the other day, and I like to work to a click track because I know that when it comes to editing or mixing, I'm like, well, I can always, do some various tricks and, put some triggers in there if maybe there's a click here or there, or, I can get some samples and place them properly. And they said, no, we don't want to work to a click track. We don't like doing it. And I said, I can deal with that. That's fine, as long as you're comfortable. Whereas before, I think probably that would have made me really anxious. I would have been, oh, are you sure? Can we maybe work for a couple of days where you get used to working to a click track? And I thought, no, trust their decision. It's their record. You just do your best with it. So, this fifth album was so much more of a happier process. There were periods, I think, because Josh was going through a few things where, and this was made much more difficult because we had to talk to each other through WhatsApp and then eventually email, because we weren't in a room together. There were times when I wanted to take a particular direction, Josh wanted to take another, and working through this album made him decide that maybe this project and this band and the direction it was going in wasn't necessarily for him, and that he wanted to go away and do his own stuff. And I think because I was so proud of this record and also like his performances in this album, I was like, look, you do what you've got to do. And I think various kinds of equipment as well, pluralizing the the pre's, the EQs, the compressors going in. Not only was that a real learning curve, and because I felt assured in my own abilities and also assured in my own inabilities, and that I allowed myself the room to learn, it just became much more fun. I took part in one of Tim Burgess's Twitter listening parties, and these have kind of blown up over the course of the pandemic because people haven't been able to go to gigs. But essentially what you do is you press play on the album, and the band will go onto Twitter and talk everybody through the album as it's played. And it's a really wonderful process. And we did that with Young Fraternity, and we had an absolutely amazing time. And we were asked back on for All or Nothing, and I thought, okay, because the album sounds so particular and so much went into making that album, and because, we worked with Butch Vig and it was mixed by Rich Costy, I'm going to ask a few questions, So, and I'm always sort of messaging Billy Bush, who engineered the album, who's also husband of Shirley Manson, who sings in Garbage. I'm always messaging going, hey, how you doing? How are things? And asking Billy for advice, and very often asking Shirley for advice. But I contacted Butch and I said, I remember at one point you told me that I had exactly the same vocal chain as Kurt Cobain. I've forgotten what that vocal chain is. Could you let me know? And he said, yeah, I can tell you everything. The microphone was the U67, the pre was and the EQ was 1073, Neve 1073, and the compressor was a URI 1176. And Billy Bush even went on to say, actually, there's also a TLA 100, and he gave me the settings of the 1176 and the 100. He was like, yeah, just take a little off this and put a boost a little bit here. And I was like, I cannot believe that we recorded this in 2007 and you remembered all of that. But anyway, I was like, great. So I used for my vocals the Neve 1073. I had a 500 series 1073, and it was one of my most favourite things to use, not least one of the most beautiful things to use. And I also had actually an 88 RLB in my 500 series rack. And I thought, I'm having to sell all my equipment off to get out of this studio contract. When I get into my new studio space, I'm going to buy or rebuild my studio, but I'd like it actually to centre around the Neve 1073. And so, I contacted AMS Neve and I just said, look, pandemic, cancelled gigs, no money, but I want to get some clients in, and I need to get recording, and also I kind of need to finish our 5th album. Is there anything you can do? And they luckily, they had 2 units that are ex-demo. They were used for some press shots. So they sent me over this 1073 SPX and this 8803 dual/stereo EQ unit. And what I'm essentially doing now is, from this point forwards, I'm going to get as many 1073 units as I can possibly get. I'm going to get, I've actually made an order for a Neve 8801 channel strip. And I ideally would like that to arrive around mid-June, because I'm writing a song for somebody and they want me to record their vocal tracks. So it will be great to run their vocals through that channel strip there. But that's essentially my future, is now going out and touring so that I can rebuild this rack. And I cannot be more excited. One of the great things about stepping back from the band for those 3 years whilst I was at uni was I could then put on the shoes of a music appreciator for the first time in a really long time, since before our first record. Because after you release an album, you become like part of the music making culture, and your appreciation is not. It's not like confined or constrained, but it's always in relation to what you happen to be creating, and you look at other people's works of art as influences, rather than just kind of going, oh, I just really like that. you know. So for 3 years, I could just go, I really like that. And it was really liberating. It was really great to be able to kind of step back and go, I'm not in a rock band. And so I don't have that very like trio rock band limitation or cap, you know, that I felt compelled to wear during those first 4 albums. So I found myself accessing platforms like Bandcamp and just getting lost down these dark alleys of synthwave producers. You know, I became this huge fan of this Russian-based synthwave distributors called, I think they were called Synthwave City or something. I think they're still going, I don't know. But anything that they released, I would buy and download in Apple Lossless, and I would just let it wash over me. So that became a real liberating process. And what that ended up doing was moving me away from the guitar and going, actually, I'd really like to buy a Roland 808. Or, you know, I'd like to buy a System 1 so that I could download some patches and try out some funky tunes. Even if I don't end up using them, God, that sounds so dad, doesn't it, funky tunes? And it came to be that I would sit down and I would be programming beats and playing synth lines along and going, oh my God, that's really lush. I'm going to remember that, or, you know, I'd log it or bank it or whatever. So when I'd pick up my guitar, I'd end up writing songs and thinking, oh, that patch I used on the synth, that'd be great for that. And I'd email Charlotte and go, you have to get this, you have to check this out. And I bought her a System 1 and sent it up, and she'd go, oh, I found this amazing sound, I've got this bass line. She'd send me down the bass line. So a lot of the album was kind of a precursor to the pandemic period of recording, where I was at uni and Charlotte was up in Sheffield, and we'd be sending each other MP3s of these things we'd come up with, and just kind of collating them together to make these fully fledged ideas. And I'd write lyrics to them, having just read this poem by some obscure Middle English author, you know, and thankfully reworking those lyrics. I think the process for this new album was one of not living by the constraints that I'd established for those first 4 albums, and a lot of that had to do with kind of coming of age as well, you know, reaching a certain point in my life where I was just actually really content, you know, in terms of like my domestic situation, you know, just being so madly in love with my wife and living such an idyllic life with my doggies and taking them for long walks, and, you know, having a fantastic relationship with Charlotte and with Josh and with my parents and my family, you know, because we'd lived in this whirlwind for 15 years of just touring and rarely seeing my sisters and my mum, and periodically seeing my dad, depending on whether he'd choose to come on that tour or not. So writing this album was me just kind of being and finding myself and being content with that. And that ended up contributing to quite easily the best songs we've ever written, by far. You know, there's this one song that has fused together our love of Outkast, Kylie Minogue, and McCluskey, and Shellac, and ABBA. So I can't wait for people to hear this song. Whilst at the same time, you know, being able to work on another song I love of Deftones and Garbage and Ramones. So yeah, it's being able to step back away from the whirlwind of rock and roll and to just be a music appreciator, to just be a person living an everyday life, to just being a person who receives other people's songs so I can just quickly remix like I'm currently doing now. To not be that guy who sings and writes songs in the subways, to be something else, allowed me to really step outside this version of myself that I didn't need to be anymore, you know? And that ended up having these incredible results in my own personal life as well.